My name is Daniel, but at the time this happened, I didn't feel like a real person. I was more like a shadow of myself, living a monotonous routine with no perspective. I worked in a small 24-hour restaurant, one of those that stay open even when no one wants to be there. My shift started at 22 o'clock and went until 6 o'clock in the morning. The money was little, but it was enough to pay the rent of a small apartment on the 5th floor of an old building. In a neighborhood where no one chooses to live, it just ends up stopping. The place was chaos, pipes that leaked, thin walls, and windows that didn't close properly. But in my situation, anything that would protect me from the cold outside was already profit. The building had a peculiar aspect. The elevator, for example, was so old that no one trusted it, even when it was running. My next-door neighbor, a man named Todd, was the kind you never wanted to meet in the hallways, always trying to sell you something interesting or borrowing money. And the lady in the apartment below mine, Mrs. Agnes, seemed to spend the whole day looking at soap operas with the volume at maximum. Despite the discomfort, I learned to ignore it. My focus was to survive. I needed to eat anything and get enough sleep to repeat the cycle. It all started on a winter Wednesday. I was coming back from the market, full of bags. The cold slowed down each step, and when I finally entered the building, the silence of the corridors seemed almost welcoming. I went upstairs, entered the apartment, and started to put things away. It wasn't until I went back to the door to lock it that I noticed something strange, a piece of yellow paper, taped right in the center. It was a post-it note with clumsy, handwritten letters. "I know what you did." I laughed. It seemed like a child's thing or some neighbor trying to be funny. I tore off the paper, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. Who has time for that, I thought. But deep down the discomforts remained. I hadn't done anything wrong, but the idea of someone sticking it on my door moved me in a way I couldn't explain. As much as I tried to forget, the phrase kept echoing in my head. "I know what you did." The following Friday, I came home exhausted after a particularly bad shift. The restaurant was packed, and my boss looked angrier than usual, shouting orders as if our survival depended on every dish that came out. When I opened the door to the apartment, everything seemed to be the way I had left it, except for one detail. In the bathroom mirror, another yellow post-it note was waiting for me. The sentence was as short as the but left me with a strange shiver. "Do you think no one is watching?" I took a step back, looking around my small apartment. The door was locked when I arrived. No window seemed to have been broken into. Whoever had put it on knew how to get in without a trace, and that was worse than anything he could write. My heart raced as I tried to reason. Maybe I forgot an unlocked door, or worse, someone has a copy of the key. Still, I threw the note away, trying to convince myself that it was just some unfunny joke, but it was not so easy to ignore. That night, I lay in bed, listening to every creak of the walls, every sound that came from the other apartments. It seemed that the whole building was conspiring to keep me awake. When I finally dozed off, I had a nightmare. Someone was standing in the door of my room, watching, motionless, with something yellow stuck in his hand. I woke up sweaty, my heart racing in my chest. I sat in bed for quite a while, staring into the darkness and trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. The third message appeared 4 days later. I had just returned from work, and as always, I threw myself on the couch, exhausted. But when I went to the bedroom, there it was. Another post-it, this time on my pillow. "You should stop it." The feeling of invasion was unbearable. It wasn't just the ticket. It was the idea that someone had been there, touched my things, crossed my space. My stomach churned as I read those words. There was no ignoring it now. Whoever it was knew enough to go in and out without being noticed. After that last ticket, I decided to take preventive measures. The next day I went to the office of the building's manager, a man named Frank, who seemed to live to avoid responsibility. He was in the back of a room full of papers and boxes, eating something that looked like a half-deflated sandwich. I told him about the tickets and asked if anyone else had complained about break-ins. He barely took his eyes off his phone as he answered, "Probably just a bad joke, you know what this place is like." "But someone's coming into my apartment," I replied. "Look, man, if you want cameras or a new lock, that's up to you. I only manage the basics around here. I left there with even more anger and anxiety. I decided to install an extra lock on the door and bought a simple security camera, which I got in an online promotion. I positioned the camera so that it recorded the entrance to the apartment. I wanted to catch anyone who tried to invade my space. For a few days, nothing happened. I reviewed the recordings obsessively, and everything seemed smooth, until another note appeared. This time, it was stuck inside the kitchen cabinet, in a place I would never have noticed if I hadn't been picking something up to eat. "You're complicating things." My throat became dry as I read those words. I reviewed the recordings again, frame by frame. Nothing. No one had entered through the front door. But somehow the note was there. I began to doubt myself. Was I getting paranoid? As scary as it was, I tried to continue with my routine, but as the days went by, I began to notice other strange things. Objects out of place. Dusty footprints near the floor of the door, which were clearly not mine. Sometimes I had the impression that the smell of the apartment was different, as if someone else had passed by. And yet, the camera recordings continued without showing anything. It was as if whoever was doing this was a ghost. My anxiety was reaching an unbearable point. What started with sporadic notes was now a constant presence in my mind. Every time I left the apartment, I wondered if I would find another message when I returned. Even at work, I couldn't concentrate. It was as if something had infiltrated my life, watching me, manipulating me. The following week, another note, this time stuck to the back of the chair where I usually sit to eat. The message was more direct and disturbing. "This is not going to end well for you." My heart raced, and my first instinct was to search every corner of the apartment. I rummaged through closets, looked under the bed, checked every lock and every window. Nothing. Everything was in place except for the yellow paper that now seemed to weigh tons in my hands. I decided to change the camera position. Perhaps the problem was the angle. This time I placed it so that I could film a good part of the interior of the apartment, including the hallway that led to the bathroom and kitchen. He didn't want any more surprises. For a few days, nothing happened. I began to think that I had finally scared away my mysterious stalker. But the calm did not last. One night, while reviewing the most recent recordings, something caught my attention. In one of the paintings, almost imperceptible, I saw what seemed to be a shadow passing through the corridor, right in the corner of the canvas. It was fast, but it was there. My stomach turned. It seemed impossible because there were no signs of invasion. How could anyone get in and out without leaving a trace? The next night I couldn't sleep. I lay there, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to every sound of the house. Every pop, every noise coming from the walls seemed bigger than it really was. The feeling that I was being watched was overwhelming. When I finally fell asleep, the nightmare returned. This time, the shadow I had seen in the recording seemed to have materialized into something more tangible. In the dream, the figure was standing in my hallway, watching my tour. I couldn't see the face, but the outline of the figure was strange. His movements were unhurried but full of interests. I woke up with my heart beating out of control. I looked at the clock. 3 o'clock in the morning. The apartment was silent, but something seemed wrong. I got up and went to the kitchen as if I was going towards what was bothering me. I had no reason to feel it, but each step seemed loaded with a weight impossible to ignore. As I walked through the door, a thought occurred to me. What if, as I looked down the hallway, I saw something there, something that shouldn't be? I walked through the bedroom door and stood in the hallway for a few seconds. All was silent. The air seemed denser than before. I hesitated for a moment, then moved forward. When I looked down the hall, I saw what I feared. The post-it. It was pinned to the bathroom door, as if it had been placed there while I was awake without realizing it. When I approached and read the message, my throat dried up. "You shouldn't be here." I jumped back, the shock leaving me breathless. The feeling of fear was instantaneous, but what terrified me the most was realizing that, at that very moment, I was no longer alone. It was no longer just someone playing with my mind. Something was really happening. It was as if the whole environment was alive, swallowing me little by little. My head was spinning. I no longer knew what was real and what was the product of my imagination. It was then that I realized that fear came with everything. It was no longer a bad joke or a simple invasion. Someone was trying to drive me crazy, forcing me to question my sanity. The note was a drop in the bucket, and now I didn't know what else to do. I decided it was time to confront anything. But before taking any action, I stood there taking a deep breath. I thought about calling the police, but a part of me said that wouldn't solve anything. What I was facing seemed like something more than simple vandalism, something more insidious, which moved in the shadows, invisible, and attacked me psychologically. I was losing control. It was as if he was being attracted to something he couldn't understand. And the worst, the feeling that nothing else was in my control was paralyzing. But I needed answers. So, with the camera on and the cell phone in hand, I started to walk around the apartment. I went to the bathroom where the note had been found and looked around carefully. The dim light of the hallway illuminated everything in an almost unreal way, as if the environment was distorted, with the corners darkening around me. Everything seemed darker. Was I really seeing that? Or was it just fear making me see things? That's when I noticed the bathroom mirror. He was slightly crooked. That wasn't like that before, and I knew that. I approached slowly, my stomach churning. The reflection of the mirror looked normal, but there was something else in the background of the image that shouldn't be there. Something moving as if it were a shadow. I looked to the side and nothing was in the hallway. So I moved even closer to the mirror and stared at the reflection more closely. It was then that I saw it. Without reflection, there it was. It was not a shadow nor a distorted reflection. He was a figure. She was standing behind me, barely noticeable. His face was empty. I can't see any details, just a kind of deep darkness where a face should be. I was paralyzed, blood frozen in my veins. I didn't know if I was seeing a ghost or if I was going crazy, but one thing was certain. It was there. I was no longer alone. When I finally managed to react, I turned quickly, but there was no one. The hallway was empty. What terrified me most was not the figure itself, but the fact that it only existed in the mirror. My reflection was intact, but what was behind me had no form outside of it. I was being watched, but not in a physical way. It was as if something was playing with my perception. Desperate, I left the bathroom and ran to the window. I tried to look at the street, as if it would wake me up, put me back in reality. But the city was too quiet. No light in the streets. Everything felt like an empty stage, and I was the only actor. My thoughts were a mess, each one trying to convince me that I should get out of there, get out for good. But I didn't know where to go. There was no safe place, and the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I looked at the clock. It was almost 5 a.m., but what was happening seemed more like a coincidence of time. Every minute dragged on. I need to do something. It was as if this presence, this thing, had a dominion over my space. So without thinking too much, I ran to the door and unlocked the lock. Something inside me said that I needed to face this. I needed to find answers. The door opened with a crack. The hallway was dark except for the dim light that escaped from the window slits in my apartment. It was as if the environment was trying to hide something from me. I took a deep breath and, with hesitant steps, walked to the end of the hallway where the service staircase led to the lower floors. I knew I needed to leave, but I didn't know exactly where to go. On the way down, the silence was absolute. No cars, no people, no life. Something was strange in the city. Could it be that everyone was swallowed by the darkness? When I reached the ground floor, I stopped with something even stranger. The entrance gate, which was normally locked, was open. I knew the manager of the building would never leave it like this. The building was in total darkness, as if time had stopped inside. I went to the gate to close it, stood there for a few minutes trying to organize my thoughts, and then returned to the apartment. There was nothing I could do. The manager of the building didn't care. The police would never take a case based on anonymous notes seriously, and I didn't have the money to move right away. All I had left was to live with that fear, with the constant feeling that someone was watching me, waiting. But waiting for what? I never found out. And then, one day, It just stopped. In the same way that it began, without warning, it also ended. No new notes appeared. No strange footprint. No feeling that there was anyone there with me. It was as if it had all been a delusion, but I knew it wasn't. The fear was real. A while later, I got another job, and I was finally able to leave that apartment, that neighborhood. But even now, in a new, safe place where no one knows what I have experienced, sometimes fear still finds me. It comes at the most unexpected times, when I see a post-it note thrown in the street, when I wake up in the middle of the night and feel the echo of that old paranoia. All the time I wonder if everything was really real, or if fear itself distorted perception. Deep down, I don't think I'll ever know the answer. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.